Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I'm Jenna Kirsten, your moderator for today's webinar, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session on HITRUST, where we'll be discussing what to expect from your first assessment. Let's go over a couple of things before we dive into our discussion. All attendees will be muted throughout the session, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A feature, which is located in the WebEx toolbar. I'll monitor those throughout the hour and have some time reserved at the end to answer those. This session is being recorded, and all attendees will be receiving a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides in your inbox tomorrow. As a bonus, all attendees will receive our timeline tool to help you customize your first-time assessment, and we'll talk a little bit more about that during the session today. Just a little bit of background about who we are before we get started. Kirkpatrick Price is a licensed CPA firm and HITRUST CSF assessor firm providing assurance to services to clients worldwide. Our firm has over 13 years of experience in information assurance by performing assessments, audits, and tests that strengthen information security and compliance controls. We offer both regulatory compliance and information security services. We provide consulting services such as policy and procedure drafting, risk assessment, internal audit plan and development, and readiness audits. We also provide guidance and audit services on frameworks such as SOC 1 and 2, SOC for cybersecurity, PCI, HIPAA, HITRUST, FISMA, ISO, and GDPR. We also encourage you to connect with us by subscribing to our blog, visiting our library of recorded webinars so you can catch up on any series at any time, and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. We have two really great speakers for today. It's going to be a great session. First, let me introduce you to Jessie Skibby. You may have seen her on some of our HITRUST videos or past webinars. Jessie is the Vice President of Strategic Development and Chief Compliance Officer here at Kirkpatrick Price, and she has over 25 years of experience in information security and regulatory compliance. Jessie's kind of led us through the HITRUST CSF Assessor process and is a member of the 2018 HITRUST CSF Assessor Council. Welcome, Jessie. I think your mic should be working. Let's see. Can you hear us, Jessie?
I think I'm muted. Hello there.
Okay, now
can you hear me now?
Yeah. You're on.
I think I was. All right. Awesome. So am I taking it over from here, Jenna, or are you going to continue with the?
Yeah, we can introduce
Sounds like
Shannon too. We've got a bonus. We've got Shannon Lane with us today, an information security specialist here at Kirkpatrick Price. Shannon also has a super vast background in information security with over 20 years of experience. And Shannon, like Jessie, is also on the 2018 HITRUST CSF Assessor Council, and we are lucky to have him today. Lucky to have both of them.
Hi there, folks.
Thanks, Jenna. I realized something. Shannon and I together have 45 years of experience, and it makes us both feel very old. But we're both super excited about being on the 2018 Assessor Council, just giving our firm a voice and giving our clients a voice and working with HITRUST and really trying to develop the most smooth process, for an assessment to make it work for all companies involved. So we're really super excited about that and glad to share even more information with everybody listening today. So just a reminder, neither Shannon or I are attorneys, so this should never be constituted as legal advice. This is meant to be informative, educational, and, and really just a guide for you. So let's go ahead and get into the agenda. On the next slide. Okay, great. So the intent of this session is really kind of based on a lot of questions we get. We get people that call us, maybe they find our name on the list of assessors, or maybe they already have an existing relationship with us, and they say, oh my goodness, I just received a letter, or I'm getting some pressure from one of my clients who really wants me to become HITRUST compliant. Now, what does that mean? What do I do? Well, we definitely want to be one of the first calls that you make. We're here to serve you if you're an existing client of ours. You know how we've served you in the past, and we want to continue that relationship with even more and more services. as well as if this is your first exposure to Kirkpatrick Price. I mean, one of our goals here at our firm is to educate, empower, and inspire, and we do that through multiple channels. And so, again, today's session is really about some of those initial questions that you want to know if you just received a notice, or if you just are jumping into this, or maybe you've been thinking about it for a while and you're just not sure exactly what's involved. Like you're trying to make a decision on whether or not to go forward, or maybe if you want to quit your job. I don't know what your decision is, but we want to make sure that we take you through all the things that you really need to know right away on going into your first assessment. And there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of changes that is happening right now with HITRUST. HITRUST has made the commitment to do a version change every year. So along with those version changes come different controls that are required for certification, different structures to the levels of controls. It's a very dynamic, risk-based assessment. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's very different depending on the organization. So we're going to take you through, for example, how much effort goes into your first-time HITRUST engagement. We're going to even talk to you about the effort that's your responsibility, the effort that's our responsibility, and then, of course, the effort that HITRUST takes. So we're going to split those into three and define to you where those efforts are going to be focused. And we're going to talk to you about the timeline. How long should it take for the first time? You know, some of you think that maybe you could get through it in 30 or 60 days, and we're going to kind of show you why that's difficult. So helping you kind of set a very realistic timeline for your first-time assessment, and the tool that you're going to get, I believe it is tomorrow, to be able to utilize on your own, really will help you set that timeline based on your own assessment. And then we're going to help get you started with the steps that you can take for your compliance journey. So getting into the discussion of how much effort is required. So it really depends on a lot of things. And one of the first, questions that people ask is, how much time is this going to take? What am I going to do? It really depends on your total level of readiness. Other types of audits that you've performed, other controls, the overall governance structure you already have. We're going to get into this in more detail, so don't panic and try to write all that down now, but we're going to go into that in more detail. And then we're going to spend quite a bit of time on scope, because the effort required significantly depends on scope. And we're going to talk to you, Shannon's going to talk to you a lot about that here in a few minutes. And then we're going to talk briefly about the assessment types and the report types that you have as options. So your effort is going to be vastly different depending on these three areas. So speaking of your level of readiness, so this is one of the first things that I always ask people that are kind of calling in for the first time or are interested in starting the journey to HITRUST compliance is what frameworks do you already have in place, or what is the risk methodology that you follow? Do you do an annual risk assessment? Are you ISO 27001 certified, or do you follow the 27002 framework? And the reason why this is such a valuable question is because the HITRUST framework itself, the CSF, was built upon ISO principles. So those 14 different categories with it that make up ISO are also the infrastructure, put in place in which, the CSF is built upon. Also, there's tremendous crossover with NIST 853 or 171. So this, if you already have, for example, an annual NIST assessment and you have the governance required to manage the NIST control framework and all of the controls in place, then your chances, or the likelihood of you getting through your first CSF assessment fairly easily and painlessly are really, you have a really good chance. So like I said, it depends on what you're already following, the controls you have in place. Because of the way HITRUST really isn't anything new, it's a gathering of controls from these various frameworks that have been in existence for some time, and they're working. They're really successfully working. So anybody who has an ISO program understands the requirements of the governance and the control structure that you have to have in place. So that marries very well and will streamline you right into your CSF assessment. So the reason PCI is on this list, and Shannon and I have some lively conversations about what, PCI, because, PCI is a little bit different than HITRUST, although it has some similarities. Very black and white, the compliance-focused assessment. HITRUST is similar but different. So the technical controls within PCI will marry nicely with what you'll have to comply with HITRUST. But the things that ISO and the things that NIST bring into the picture are more of that governance framework that you have to have in place. So if you're following PCI already, you'll have a better chance. Your level of readiness will be farther advanced, but you won't quite be as advanced if you're already following NIST or ISO. So I hope that makes sense. And then, of course, a SOC engagement, if you have a Service Organization Control Report, an SSAE 18, a SOC 1, SOC 2, those are very foundational building blocks for a HITRUST CSF engagement. So if you have those in place, you're just going to build upon what you've already started. So again, this kind of starts from top to bottom as far as what you already have in place and how you can kind of measure your total level of readiness against that. So another really key factor, and then one of the very first things I ask is, what does your policy or procedure documentation look like? Because if you tell me, oh, well, we're, kind of in our initial stages of drafting an information security policy, I might, put my hand on my forehead and say, oh my goodness, you've got a long way to go, because everything in HITRUST is really driven towards documentation. So documentation and policy, documentation and procedure, and of course the implementation. Those would be the three key levels of maturity that you have to take you into a HITRUST assessment. So policy and procedure strength is a key factor in your level of readiness. And the one great thing, and I don't mean to scare anybody off because this is totally achievable by any size organization, we've seen it happen, but as far as measuring your own level of readiness, this just kind of sets the stage for how much work do I have to do. And the good thing about the way the CSF is constructed is that the way the controls are written can very easily be incorporated into your documentation. So they're kind of giving you the roadmap. They're giving you what they want you to see as far as control framework. So another thing is, are you starting with a self-assessment? Because we've rarely, in fact, we've never, not an experience of our firm, jumped straight into a validated assessment. If you haven't gone through a self-assessment, a gap analysis, or some sort of readiness review prior to engaging your assessment firm for the assessment, you really would have some difficulty. So it would significantly affect your level of readiness. And okay, of course, is this your first compliance effort? If it's not your first compliance effort, you've already had many of these that we've already talked about in place, then your level of readiness is going to be quite a bit higher. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Shannon, to talk about the next topic, which would be scoping.
Now, that spirited discussion that Jesse and I had around the PCI DSS, about 50% of it was about scoping. And I'm going to warn you folks that I could talk about scoping for a full hour. So understand that this is a very quick and high-level overview of the questions we ask you for your readiness around scoping and what we're actually going to be working with when we come out on an engagement. Do you have the documentation that you need to actually even begin developing your scope? Do you have a data flow diagram? Do you understand how data flows through your network? The data that you're protecting, do you know everywhere it lives? Do you know where it travels? Do you know how you use it? Do you know how you destroy it at the end of the day? Do you have a good network diagram? Do you really understand the systems that everyone's going to be evaluating? Do we have a good inventory? Do we understand how they connect to each other? Do you have good data retention practices? Remember that you only have to protect data to the point that you destroy it. If you're over-retaining, HITRUST will get a hold of you on that. More than that, do you understand where you're keeping it and in what forms to know how to destroy it at the end of the day? Do you understand what processes make up your workflow? This isn't the technical piece. This is, do you understand how the human beings that do the work in your environment work with this data to understand how that data is actually affected by what you do and at every step along the way? Also, do you have any legal or regulatory standards that go above and beyond what HITRUST is going to expect of you? For example, if you're in the midst of a lawsuit, retention becomes very, very important, and understanding how that retention is going to affect your audit is going to be absolutely at the forefront of your scoping consideration. The idea behind this, of course, is to understand everything you have that you would like to have HITRUST certified. and to put boundaries around that so that we can begin to understand the details necessary to get your technical readiness up to par. Now, when we talk about data flow, this is a sample data flow document that we kind of put together just to show a high-level overview. Do you truly understand your data? Do you truly understand what it is that you're going to certify and how it moves through your environment? Because every connection that we have here calls out to your scope at the end of the day. When we talk about your network diagram, we're talking about how does it flow from one place to another? How are your systems interconnected? Do you have separate subnets? Is segmentation in place? Do you have the technical controls necessary to limit your scope, or does your scope encompass your entire organization? Both of those have very different ramifications for your readiness. And simply understanding that before you walk into the process will determine how difficult it is to get your technical side up to par.
So Shannon, can we go back one slide for a second, Jenna? So in this example, what we want to kind of paint a picture of here is how, you know, the HITRUST assessment is not geared towards certifying an entire organization. I mean, their intention is to certify systems and processes. So like in this example, we have you know, this different segmentation throughout the network. So your scoped environment could very well be just one segment, you know, one service deliverable, one process. So, and HITRUST has been very clear about not wanting to, I mean, they will certify an entire organization. If your organization and structure is very flat, if you have one primary service deliverable and there's no segmentation of that data, then certifying the entire organization is somewhat doable. However, they want to certify systems. And so thinking about it as far as what your scope is. So who has access to the data that's in scope? So it's the people, the process, and the technology that are all related to that scoped environment, which is that grouping of systems that deliver that particular service that you're certifying. Did I say that right, Shannon?
Yes, and to further paint that picture, if you all will imagine a hospital, HITRUST is perfectly happy to certify an entire hospital, but think about how many systems and people and processes are in place for a hospital. Just to get surgery, you have I never say that word right. Anesthesiology? How do they say that word? Anyway, you have anesthetics and the doctors that administer them. You have surgery. You have pre-op. You have post-op. You have recovery. You may have ICU involved. All of those are completely different verticals that operate with each other, but only connect at endpoints. Everything inside of that process is its own process. So for a hospital to certify, say, an EMR is a far easier endeavor than to certify the entire hospital. Similarly, for every other business, if what you need to do is certify your data storage, that may be vastly different than certifying everything, including your accounting department, your sales department, your marketing department, which may have nothing to do with the process that you're actually pushing through this data workflow that you've put together. So keep that in mind. Limiting your scope may or may not even be possible, but if it does occur, if you can limit your scope to just that process, your overall readiness is actually going to be a lot higher. It's going to be a much easier assessment for you than to try to do the entire organization at once. In the end, we're asking three fundamental questions, though. Do you understand where your data is, how it's maintained and used, and do you have good data retention around it? And if you can answer those questions well, then scoping is an easier exercise. Now, one of the biggest questions you have to answer, again, that determines your readiness for this piece, what do you want to incorporate into your assessment? You remember early on we talked about legal, regulatory, and compliance standards. HITRUST, the CSF as an assessment can stand up and assist you in reporting your necessary legal and regulatory compliance with certain frameworks, New York State Department's financial services, cybersecurity requirements, regulation. Boy, that thing's huge, isn't it? The state of Massachusetts, state of Nevada, state of California, state of Texas, all of those are very well represented in HITRUST. State of Texas actually will certify you alongside of the HITRUST assessment if you do a HITRUST certification and include the state of Texas requirements. The state of Texas also certifies you as part of it. FTC, red flags, GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, the list goes on. That's about half of what HITRUST can help you to certify.
I want to touch on something here, Shannon. I think this is a commonly misunderstood topic because one of the first questions, so if you call us and you say, okay, Kirkpatrick Price, we would like to hire you to help us with our gap analysis and into our assessment, one of the very first things that we're going to ask you is a lot of the questions that we're going through right now. And one of them that's commonly misunderstood is this area of regulatory requirements. So these regulatory requirements built into the HITRUST assessment are optional for you. They're not required to select them. I always describe this as, is it important for the reader? Okay, so one of two things. The reader of your report, does the reader of your HITRUST certification report care about this? Do they want to see that you're also compliant with the New York Department of Financial Services cyber regulation? Do they want to see that? Or is it, so option number two is, you know what, I care about that. I want to make sure, I'm the information security officer or I'm the CEO, I want to make sure that our organization is compliant with these. So this is a due diligence effort on our part. There's no requirement by HITRUST that you incorporate these. So I want to make that perfectly clear because when you're scoping out your assessment, these regulatory risk factors could be the difference of an assessment that includes 300 requirement statements or up to 700 requirement statements. So for example, adding PCI or adding in, I believe it's the state of Massachusetts, will almost double the size of your assessment. So when you're going through your very first assessment, think about one of those, there should be one of two reasons why you include these in your environment, in your scoped environment. One, you know, the reader of your report cares about it, or two, I need to make sure that we have the due diligence in place, so this is a good test of my own internal control. So that's one of the common misunderstandings.
And it's also worth saying that different kinds of HITRUST assessment, which Jesse will touch on here shortly, have different levels of reporting for this kind of thing. For example, GDPR in 9.1 is not as complete as we expect it to be in version 10. GDPR requires a wide swath of privacy controls that are simply not present in the 9.1 certification assessment. So keep that in mind as well. Different assessment types represent these regulatory and compliance standards a heck of a lot better. It all depends on what kind of assessment you need and what your clients are looking for. So it is imperative to say that as you are building this assessment, as you are considering doing a HITRUST assessment, it is all about your process. Your processes are fundamental to designing the assessment you're going to have. So fundamental, in fact, that as you go through your initial gap assessment, as you are going through your initial scoping exercise, HITRUST customizes its requirements for your particular assessment, for your particular organization, based upon the scope you define. The wider or more involved your scope, the more data you hold or process, the bigger your interaction with protected data, the more requirements you're going to face and the bigger the assessment becomes. So understanding your process is actually fundamental to being able to understand just how much effort you're going to have to put in to secure that process, which I think makes perfect sense.
I think you said that beautifully, Shannon. It's really about understanding, people understand their process for the most part, but understanding how their process fits into how the assessment will be viewed is so incredibly key. So let's go on to the...
If you take nothing else away from this whole thing, remember that every assessment is customized to you. I have not yet done 2 assessments that have exactly the same number of requirement statements, even with companies that have fundamentally similar structures. Small details make big differences in the end. And as Jesse pointed out, those differences can be the difference between 350 requirement statements, which is about what we're seeing as an average for most of the people that are coming through, and there's 500, 700 requirement statements. And those are very, very different to prep for.
Absolutely. So let's get into the different assessment and report types. And the reason why this is so important when you're going into your first year is because we've heard all kinds of requests and demands, that our clients are receiving from their covered entity clients. And that is, sometimes there's a 3-year plan laid out. Sometimes it's hey, we want your self-assessment report first, then we want a validated assessment report, and then we want a certification report. So I wanted to kind of explain to you the difference in those and just really make sure that you understand to really get an understanding of what your clients are looking for. So have they said, you need to be HITRUST certified by December 30th? Or have they said you need to have a validated assessment report by December 30th? Or have they said, you have to have a self-assessment report? So these are the different report types that you can actually get during, right from HITRUST. So just to clarify this, so as the assessment firm, we assist you in the 3 of these. So actually there's more than what's even represented on this slide, but we assist you in the guided self-assessment report, but it's your HITRUST subscription, your MyCSF object that you build. You have to have a relationship with HITRUST in order to get that. Our role in this is to be the assessor. We're either guiding you through in the self-assessment phase or we're performing the actual validated work in the validated assessment. So, but the reports themselves that we're talking about here are all coming directly from HITRUST. So in the realistic world, you would sign up with HITRUST, you would sign up with the MyCSF. I know version 2.0 is either out now or it's coming out within the next 30 days of their new version of their platform. So it's a subscription to the MyCSF tool, whether that subscription is an annual subscription, which we highly recommend, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, or whether it's a 90-day temporary period of time, you will get out of that object one of 3 things. Actually, one of 2 things, a self-assessment report or a validated assessment report, depending on what you choose to do. So the difference is we're going from top to bottom in really the level of due diligence that you're showing your client. So if you have a self-assessment report that you're handing them, think about that. That really just means, hey, I'm attesting to the fact that these controls in place, but we did not have an assessment firm go through and do the validation. So a self-assessment report, very entry-level demonstration of compliance to your clients, but a very good first step. So that's a self-assessment report. What we do as a firm is we provide the guidance that you need to really get started. As you can tell just from listening in here, sometimes, and I like to say this, it's a silly example, but you kind of need a secret decoder ring to figure out some of the different nuances of the HITRUST framework. So the guided assessment would be having an assessor firm actually help you through that self-assessment, and your deliverable would be the self-assessment report. So the validated assessment report. Validated assessment just means that you've signed up for the MyCSF, you've built your validated assessment object, and you've actually had an assessor firm come behind you and actually validate your controls. This does not mean, in all cases, that certification will be granted. So certification is only achieved if you have, and we could talk about this a whole nother webinar, but if you have a certain level of maturity within each of the controls that were validated. So you can still receive a validated assessment report without certification. So basically this is your second level. Think about this as, okay, we want to go further than a self-assessment, but we don't think we're at the maturity level that we're going to achieve actual certification. You can still get a validated assessment report. It's still valuable, but, I mean, for the most part, 95% of the people that come to us are really looking for a validated assessment with certification. So your goal is to, achieve the level of maturity that you need to achieve across all those assessment domains and actually get a validated assessment report. So the difference between these two, security and comprehensive, that from what we've heard is going to primarily go away with version 10. So the version 10 that's coming out in December of this year is going to be more of a comprehensive, and if you're new to this, the difference is right now in version 9.1, a security validated assessment report with certification only requires that level of maturity on 75 of the controls. There's 135 total controls in the comprehensive framework, security version of that right now, which is what 99.9% of companies go after, is the security certification, is only requiring in version 9.1 compliance with 75 of the controls. So what we've heard through, through HITRUST is that in version 10, they do plan on flattening that out so that all 135 controls will be required for certification. However, the way that they construct the levels, the level 1, 2, and level 2 and level 3, and we've been talking about the number of requirement statements, that grows when you add levels based on your risk factors. So they're expecting that the comprehensive assessment will not change dramatically those number of requirement statements, but it will require the number of baseline controls that you have to comply with. So if you're new to this, I'm sorry that may be confusing, but the important thing here is to know, understand what is your client asking for? Are they asking very specifically for, are they requiring certification? Are they requiring a validated assessment? Or are they requiring that first year self-assessment? So this is one of the first things we would walk through with you if you contacted us and needed assistance with this. We want to make sure we're clear on the report type that you actually have to have. Not mentioned on this slide, but worth noting, is that you can also have a SOC 2 report written based on either the security or the comprehensive framework. So it's not the same as HITRUST certification. However, because of an agreement between the ICPA and HITRUST, it is allowable. So it's just one more way of demonstrating HITRUST compliance. So we could talk for hours about that, but I know we need to move on.
Before we wander off, for those of you guys that are familiar with the PCI DSS, the easiest way to remember these different levels are self-assessment is functionally equivalent to a SAQ, self-assessment questionnaire. When you move up into the certification levels, it's about getting a ROC at that point. The security certification is closest to the idea of having a self-assessment questionnaire that has been signed off on by an external audit firm, a QSA, and then the comprehensive is like getting the full ROC done. Now, that is not an exact equivalent, but if you're looking at just kind of the idea of assurance, those three levels really do fit. One of the things that we want to talk about and now is what a timeline looks like. This is the biggest question we get asked. Day one, even before we come out for a gap assessment, somebody will call us up and they'll be asking our sales team, hey, how long is this going to take? I'm ready. Let's go. I want to get this done in 30 days. And we've not yet found a firm that can honestly go from inception to completed report in 30 days. It takes a great deal of effort. We're going to show you two timelines today. The first timeline that we're going to look at here is for a 180-day remediation period. Now, this is for an organization that has no real formal information security program, what we talked about at the beginning, that doesn't really have good documentation around data flow, network systems, doesn't have good segmentation, or has difficulty determining scope. Or if you have never had an audit before, no matter how good you are at the rest of it, we're still going to put you guys towards this timeline. And assuming that you guys decided you were going to do this on January 1st of this year, and you guys got your subscription on January 1st of this year to the MyCSF portal. So I'm going to segue. We're going to talk for a second about the MyCSF portal. If there is a cost hurdle getting into HITRUST, it's usually the portal that becomes the biggest cost hurdle to get into HITRUST. But around Kirkpatrick Price, we believe that there's no greater indication of first-time success with a HITRUST audit than to have and to use the MyCSF portal throughout the entirety of the assessment, from the gap till the corrective action plans get filed. Simply, every single HITRUST assessment is absolutely unique to the organization. In order to determine what you're actually going to have to do, you really do need the demographic tools that HITRUST provides in that portal to get your real set of requirement statements. More than that, you gain the capacity to work on those requirement statements as a self-assessment for the entire duration of your subscription in the portal. Now, that's important. If you go for just assessment, if you say, I don't want to do the portal, we're going to dive straight into assessment, then all of the self-assessment work we're about to talk about has to happen within a 90-day period. And the validation of that assessment with your auditor has to happen pretty much in the same 90-day period. So this entire 180-day remediation, this entire plan of walking through the systems, making sure that you have every requirement statement in place, that you have auditors that can come look at it, that we're doing this validated, the self-assessment to a validated report, it kind of goes out the window, and you end up locking yourself into a 90-day time frame. Now, you can extend that. HITRUST will allow you for a fee to extend your validation period. I think it's in 30-day increments. Am I right on that, Jessie?
Yes.
Yes, it's in 30-day increments indefinitely. You can go as long as you want. They're perfectly happy to do it. But after 2 extensions, you have probably exceeded your original fee that it would have taken you to get a subscription. After 4 of them, the entire cost on HITRUST side of the fence, remember, we know that it's a fixed the subscription cost. You will have exceeded both the fixed fee and the subscription cost after 4 extensions. So if it takes longer than that 90 days, you can run into some significant cost overruns all around the portal itself. But more than that, it's just difficult. You're asking to take all of this work and to squeeze it into a very tiny time frame.
Well, not to mention the transferring of the self-assessment object into the validated assessment object. So not only just the fear of going over and paying extra, but the time savings of the valuable time of the staff members of the company, having to answer to all the self-assessment and the validated assessment in a very closed time period. So there's a number of reasons why you should really do your research and do your evaluation on the ROI of the subscription cost. It is, like Shannon said, it is one of the biggest obstacles to overcome, because you think, why should I have to pay all this money? I've hired my assessment firm. But it is a tool, and I used this analogy to Shannon earlier. It's like, to me, it's like trying to climb a mountain without a good map. It's like, you can get to the top, but if you don't have that subscription with the black and white set of instructions in front of you, it's just going to take you longer to get there. It's going to take you longer. It's going to take you more effort to get to the top if you don't have a good roadmap in front of you. So that's how I kind of like to describe it.
Yeah, and we will definitely talk more about that when we talk about pitfalls in a later webinar. But I cannot stress enough how much of a difference it makes. Understand that when we talk about 300 requirement statements, that represents 1,500 individual tests in your environment. That work effort is not insignificant. And to do that in 90 days is incredibly difficult. Now, I'm not talking about the assessment. The actual assessment piece of it is really not that bad, but for you guys to go from having nothing at all to being completely ready, that's a very difficult house to lift. That's going to take you some real effort to get there. So we recommend following a little bit of a different timeline. We recommend getting a gap assessment as soon as humanly possible. And for Compact Your Price, our gap assessment involves coming out and scoping you, getting to understand your environment, laying in all the requirement statements that you're going to need, and fully preparing you for self-assessment. Then you go through a period of self-assessment. Usually takes for a company somewhere between 10 business days and 2 weeks, depending on how, and 3 weeks, I'm sorry, depending on how robust, how thorough you want to be about it. But it's essentially a sanity check, moving through all of the requirement statements and determining whether or not you have all of these pieces, putting your finger on every single policy and procedure that you're asked for, looking at the technical controls, and just highlighting all of the things you don't. Then you move into remediation, and we are locking in on this one 180 days, 6 months of remediation, assuming, of course, no formal information security program or a weak information security program. If you've never done an audit before, to understand how exact some of the things that we look for may be, and to make sure you have those particular pieces in place, or if you don't have a really good understanding of how your data flows or your processes really function at a technical level, the remediation is going to take a significant amount of time. Once your remediation is complete, that actually completes the full self-assessment. I know that that's a little confusing, but that's actually what happens is during your remediation, you will put in all of the details for your self-assessment. You transfer that object to being a validated assessment. You bring in your assessment firm, and then that takes somewhere between 30 and 90 days to complete. Generally speaking, Kirkpatrick Price targets that for 60 days of assessment, 30 days of QA and other work, and then we've submitted it over to HITRUST for them to do their QA and assessment. So the HITRUST QA, you can see if you started in January and you followed our timeline, would begin in September, and your final report would come a month after that. Now, there's one last step. Your final report doesn't mean that you're finished yet. If you are going for certification, you will also need to submit a corrective action plan for those items which are considered marginal by HITRUST scoring requirements. Once that corrective action plan is received, you will be issued a certification. Should you have passed, you'll be issued a certification, and then you're into your 2-year timeline following that. So you can see from start to finish, if you started in January, you can pretty much expect a final report in November in time for Christmas. It takes a significant amount of time to get through. Now, on the other hand, if you are one of those ISO and NIST folks that we talked about very early on, if your PCI scope matches exactly the scope that you intend to do for HITRUST, keep in mind that that is a very rare occurrence, but if it does happen, then great. You might be able to get away with a 60-day remediation period. If you have a truly mature information security program, if you all really are following ISO and NIST practices, and you're living it and breathing it, you can get away with 60 days to remediate everything. Again, we do our subscription on January 1st. We do a gap to get you guys set up for your self-assessment and to identify all of the pieces that we see that are high and hard and need a bit of work. You move into your self-assessment. The self-assessment through the completion of remediation, we would slate in by about March. Then you would move immediately into your validated assessment. And from the validated assessment to the end is pretty much the same process. The real difference in timeline is always how long will it take to fix what you're looking at. And I want to emphasize that to everybody. Both Jesse and I have been in IT before we became auditors, and maybe that makes us a little bit fatalistic when it comes to remediation times. But remember that your IT staff and your information security staff, if you have a separate department, they're already working and they're already loaded. All of this remediation is under the assumption that they have to do that job as well as implement all of these new things for HITRUST and still do it on some pretty strict time schedules. That does mean that in your first year, if you're planning major migrations, if you have major employee issues, if you have a data center move or other huge significant change that's going to happen in the organization, that would overload or task your people very heavily, they're not going to be available to do that remediation, and it's going to extend your remediation period out. Additionally, if your IT staff is already heavily loaded, it can take significant time to get all of the new systems, new things in place, new controls up and running to the level that's required for HITRUST. And we're not just going to talk about your IT staff. Much of HITRUST is in governance. So we're going to hit your information security officer, your CTO, even your CFO is going to get involved and have to look at policies, procedures, and systems within the environment to make sure they're up to par before the assessor comes in the door. So keep in mind, you don't want to sugarcoat your own remediation period. It is better to start early, to get into that self-assessment and to understand what you're facing than it is to start late and have to run to do this at the very last second. If you're running to do it at the very last second, the chances are you will not certify. You'll get a validated assessment because that's just a matter of flipping a switch and doing it. But it's all about maturity and having things in place and functional the way that they need to be in place and functional. And that takes a little bit more time than just flipping a few switches or changing a configuration on a router.
All right, so let's show a different view of this. So this timeline, this is actually a snapshot of the tool that you guys are going to be able to get and plug in your own timeline. So you can see there's the two areas in blue on this slide is where you would plug in your start date, and then you would plug in your remediation day. So the reason why I hope this is a little bit, it's kind of hard to look at that last graphic and really get a true picture of how long it will take. So this is a breakdown of the actual steps that are required that we've described. So getting your subscription, and also what's really important to note is the responsibility. So I think one of the biggest things that people ask us about is, you know, how long is it going to take my IT staff or my information security staff, or how much time is my staff going to spend? Well, obviously that depends on your readiness that we've spent a lot of time walking through, but it also depends on, you know, which stage of the process is the project and who's responsible. So the responsible party is, of course, the individuals that will be involved. So obviously the gap analysis planning, that's Kirkpatrick Price, hopefully, and you, if you're the client. Getting the subscription, that's all you. So that has to be a direct relationship between you and HITRUST. You contact HITRUST directly and get your subscription. And then, of course, we help you with the on-site gap analysis, and the self-assessment is on you. So then you can plug in your estimated remediation time. So let's say you come out of your self-assessment and you realize you've got, oh, I've got about 100 items that I need policy and procedure on, and I shouldn't say that. This is turning out to be such a scary presentation, Shannon. It's achievable by all size companies, by the way. We've seen companies that have less than 100 employees, you know, come through and get certified successfully. So depending on the number of policies and procedures, usually that's the biggest obstacle to overcome. You know, having everything documented. A lot of times people are doing it, they just don't have it written down. So, but documenting it within policy and procedure, if you have a really strong person who can knock that out in 60 days, that's awesome. You know, if you've already got all of these technical controls in place, so depending on the outcome of your self-assessment, is when you can put a project plan together and say how long it will take you to remediate. So that's your decision, that's all on you. So this is something that you can calculate on your own to kind of estimate the completion. And the reason why this type of tool is so important is because you want to be able to update your client. You want to say, okay, we expect to have our final report on, you know, August 4th, or whatever the case may be. So kind of going through this again, with responsibility, you say you complete your remediation, and then you contact your assessment firm and you have that first planning call, you build your assessment object, you begin with us. Our process works is we review the documentation remotely. You know, we never want to be sitting in your conference room, you know, reading documentation. So we take about the first 30 days looking through your documentation, giving you any feedback if we have. So how the validated assessment works is you kind of go through the process and you score yourself. We either agree or disagree with your assessment based on our testing and observation. So we will go back and forth making sure we're all in agreement with the way you've scored yourself, do our testing, obviously completing the on-site implementation testing. That's when we're really doing the majority of our observation and our actual implementation testing. We're expecting, you know, 4 to 5 days for that exercise, actually in your locations, testing with your staff. And then, of course, we finalize our assessment. We send all of our validated assessment information into HITRUST through the MyCSF. So be mindful, we're both sides are working in the MyCSF tool at this point. We're responding to your answers, and we're sending it all to HITRUST. So there's some timelines here at the bottom that are in complete control of HITRUST. So it doesn't have, we can't shorten this time frame, you can't shorten this time frame. There's 14 days allowable for HITRUST QA. This is a process where they're essentially auditing the auditor. You know, they are validating our work. Did we test the control as it should be tested? So it takes about 14 days going back and forth on that. And then HITRUST allows up to 6 weeks to write the report. So they take all of the findings. Now, I've seen this come out as less than a week, and lately I've seen it take all the way to the 6-week time frame. So there's really not a good way to measure, you know, depending on how many reports are coming through the HITRUST queue, they allow up to 6 weeks. It could be much quicker, but you have to allow at least that 6 weeks. And then, of course, the draft comes out. You review the draft for any administrative changes. They're not expecting any control changes or scoring changes at that point in time. And then your final report is delivered alongside of your corrective action plan. So this gives you a different view, and hopefully this is something where you could use it, dynamically. So in the tool that you're going to receive from us, you can key in your start date, and then once you're done with your self-assessment, you can put a project plan together and estimate how much time you would need to remediate. All right, so we can move on to I know we're almost out of time, and I haven't seen a single question in the Q&A box, and I just want to remind you guys, this is the team here at Kirkpatrick Price that handles the majority of the HITRUST assessments that we deliver. So Shannon is an excellent technical resource. I'm absolutely your administrative and technical resource as far as how this works. So take advantage of this time. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. And if we run out of time, which there's a good chance we will follow up with you afterwards. So please don't be shy about asking your questions. So just to kind of reiterate the responsibility, so it's good to understand that this is a three-way relationship going into a HITRUST assessment. HITRUST always has to be involved. They are the only party that can issue certification. We can't say you're certified. You can't say you're certified. This is a true certification. It's a little bit different than when companies say, oh, I'm PCI certified. Well, we know what that means. That means you've gone through a PCI assessment and you have your report on compliance, your ROC. That's what people use as a term, certification. Well, HITRUST is different. It's truly a certification, and HITRUST is the only entity that can issue that certification. We can help you. We can guide you. We're going to test your controls to make sure that we get through the HITRUST QA process together, but it is only HITRUST that can issue that. So you have to have a direct relationship with them to get your MyCSF subscription or your assessment objects purchased. And then, of course, so we have a relationship with HITRUST because we are an authorized assessment firm. Only authorized assessment firms can perform HITRUST assessments. So there is the relationship between an assessor firm and HITRUST. And, of course, there's a relationship between you as the client and us. So there's really a three-way relationship, and there's responsibilities and expectations of all three of these parties to get to your goal, which would be that validated assessment or that certification report. So just a little bit kind of at a high level, again, where to start. If this is something new to you and you're feeling a little overwhelmed right now because we've just talked to you about a lot of details and a lot of difficulty that you may have to overcome, to achieve your goals. So where to start is to really familiarize yourself with the HITRUST CSF. This, there's several videos and past webinars that we've recorded on this, so I'm just going to give you the 10,000-foot overview. But you can download the CSF from HITRUST directly. Version 9.1 is available right now. Be mindful that version 10 is coming out in December, so you really want to plan accordingly. So if you are starting your gap analysis now, and you're planning on not starting your assessment until the beginning of January of next year, say, for example, you may want to look at the comprehensive set of controls versus just the security controls because you know that those version 10 changes are coming. But familiarize yourself. It is a free download from the CSF or from the HITRUST website, and as long as you're a qualifying organization, you can download that. And really what that means is as long as you're not doing consulting or something else with the CSF and you're going to use it yourself, you qualify to download that for free. So defining your scope, we talked a lot about that, the importance of scope. So understanding, and Shannon did a great job of describing how important it is to understand what your scope is. What do you want to certify? Who is the reader of your report? What do they care about? How could you possibly segment and narrow your scope to make the assessment process easier for you and quicker to deliver it? So determining what assessment object or assessment report type you need. Again, that's just getting possibly the much needed clarification that you need from your clients or the requester of the report. Maybe it's your CEO that says, I want to do this. I want to achieve HITRUST certification because it would be an excellent way for us to grow our, our marketing presence in the healthcare market. Whatever the case may be, wherever it's coming from, understand if you're the person responsible for accomplishing this task, what assessment type do you need and what report type are the requirements? Because that could determine what path you need to take. And I strongly recommend assembling a project team. This is not something that a single person can do on their own. If they can, it can be done, but it's really rare. Typically you need those technical resources. So think about administrative and technical controls that you're going to have to pull together to get through this process. So find somebody who is excellent at writing policies and procedures. Find somebody who can give you those technical answers and help you define your scope and develop that plan. Make sure that you have buy-in, that tone at the top. This is not something that you can push through and achieve without the support of your leadership. It has to be something that your executive management has decided to do. So you need to have that tone at the top kind of pushing this plan into action. And building relationships, this is really important. I hope that you can tell by how passionate Shannon and I are both on this topic that we would love to help you. I think finding an assessment firm that really does care about your success and will give you the best possible guidance to get you there, that's important. We'll make sure that we tell you, when we can be your guide and when we have to be your judge, as Shannon says. When can we be your guide to help you get started, and when can we be standing there at the gate before you go to HITRUST and making sure you have all of your I's dotted and T's crossed. That's when we become the judge. That's when we become the assessor that needs to validate all of your controls. So building the relationships that you need to be able to create success in your project is very, very important. So now I think we were hoping to have a few questions. I don't know, do we have any questions yet in the Q&A box? I don't think we do.
I'd like to say while Jesse's looking, don't let us scare you either, though. HITRUST is very, very doable, and as auditors, we exist in a world of caution and worry because we're auditors and we exist in a world of caution and worry. I have seen organizations with 12 people dive down this road, and they're doing a great job. And I've seen organizations with 500 people diving down this road, and they're doing a great job. It can be done. And it's not even that hard, and it puts you in a great place to be at the far side of it. What it is exact. Each one of those requirement statements requires you to consider it and implement it and make sure that it's part of what you do every day. And if there's any complexity, that's really the complexity that's in the assessment. So as much as we talk about caution, just remember, you really can do it.
That is right, Shannon. We do have a question. So the question is, for scoping, are we only concerned with systems that store and process medical records for HITRUST?
Not anymore. HITRUST, as of version 9, not even really 9.1 anymore, was really focused on EPHI. But the truth is it's really not anymore. It's focused on whatever data it is that you want to protect. So if that is EPHI, then absolutely, yes. But the minute you bring in, like, the regulatory compliance of PCI, well, now we're going to be looking at card data. If you bring in, if your client is interested in HITRUST for reasons other than medical, which is becoming more and more common, then it's going to be around whatever data it is that you're protecting. But keep in mind that the definition of a system is kind of a big thing. People, processes, and technology involved in whatever task that you are doing with this particular set of data.
Also keep in mind, too, if you have medical records that are segmented from, say, your credit card environment or other pieces of data, and the medical records are the reason why your client is asking you, then it could pertain to just that segment of your network. Because, unless you have all that data combined into one database, then it would consume everything. The other really important thing to note, and we're going to talk about this more in another webinar soon, but that is HIPAA is actually being removed from the base foundation. It's actually becoming a regulatory risk factor that can be added into HITRUST in version 10. So it is becoming much more of a widespread adoptable framework through other industry segments other than healthcare, which is actually a very good thing if you're a company that's struggling with needing to comply with multiple frameworks and having multiple audit types. The way HITRUST is headed, and with the way it's based on foundationally ISO and NIST and has crossover with PCI, it really could begin to become a one-stop, report for a lot of companies that have to comply with multiple audit objectives. So that was kind of a long-winded answer to your question about medical records, but there are a lot of changes that you should be mindful of going forward in how HITRUST is really, and I've said this before, and I can't believe I'm saying it publicly, but going for world domination, because the incorporation of GDPR brings it into an international brings international eyes on it. So it's going to become more of an internationally recognized framework that is going to satisfy multiple audit requirements, not just healthcare, going into other industry segments. So definitely something to watch for.
And as an entity, if you're choosing HITRUST, if HITRUST is your set of controls of choice, if it's your framework of choice, understand that it really does now go across your entire network and can be your framework of choice without any real issue. Take NIST, take ISO, smash them together, add in a few dashes from many of other frameworks, including like FedRAMP and all, and you end up with HITRUST, which is really endeavoring to give you a good information security profile across your entire organization, whatever it is you're trying to protect.
Well, miraculously, we went right to the top of the hour. So, Jenna.
Yeah, right to the top. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, as you've heard Jesse and Shannon both mention upcoming webinars, our next one will be on July 12th, and it's going to be a full hour on scoping, so please make sure to join us for that, and we'll have more HITRUST webinars throughout the year. So thank you, Jesse and Shannon. That was really, really helpful and a great hour. Everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.